The weird roommate. When Cassie first met Lila, she thought she had lucked out. After weeks of browsing for affordable rooms in the city, the apartment she found in a quiet, cozy neighborhood seemed like a dream. Lila, the current tenant, was polite and soft-spoken during their initial meeting, offering a firm handshake and a kind smile. She mentioned she worked odd hours, so she mostly kept to herself, which suited Cassie just fine. The rent was cheap, the place was clean, and Lila seemed normal enough. What more could she ask for? The first few weeks were quiet. Lila was mostly out during the day, and when she was home, she stayed in her room, never making a sound. Cassie appreciated the privacy and the lack of drama. It wasn't that they didn't get along, they just didn't interact much. Occasionally, they'd exchanged pleasantries in the kitchen, but nothing more. However, as the weeks went by, Cassie started noticing things. Little things. At first, they were easy to dismiss. Lila had a strange habit of keeping her door locked at all times, even when she was home. Not just closed, locked. It wasn't typical, but maybe she was just a private person, Cassie reasoned. Then there were the noises. Late at night, when Cassie was lying in bed, she'd sometimes hear Lila moving around in her room. The sound of shuffling feet or quiet whispers. It wasn't talking, more like muttering. Cassie chalked it up to Lila being on the phone, but she never heard anyone respond. It was always just Lila's voice, low and constant, like a faint drone in the dead of night. And then there was the smell. One evening, Cassie came home late from work. She opened the front door and was immediately hit by a strange odor. Something metallic, sickly sweet, and rotten all at once. It seemed to be coming from Lila's room. Cassie wrinkled her nose and hesitated by the hallway. Was something dead in there? Before she could knock on Lila's door, it swung open. Lila stood there, smiling calmly, as if nothing were amiss. She was dressed in her usual clothes, neat and proper. But there was something in her eyes that unsettled Cassie. Something cold, almost hollow. "Everything okay?" Cassie asked, trying to keep her voice light. Lila's smile didn't falter. "Just cleaning. Sorry about the smell. It'll be gone soon." Cassie wanted to ask more, but Lila's expression made her think better of it. She nodded, offered a forced smile, and retreated to her room, shutting the door behind her. That night, the smell lingered, creeping through the apartment like a living thing. Cassie opened a window to let in some fresh air, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the faint sound of Lila's voice again, murmuring behind her locked door. A few days later, Cassie was rummaging through the kitchen cabinets when she noticed something strange. The kitchen had been fully stocked when she moved in, but now several knives were missing. A couple of large butcher knives, a small paring knife, all gone. Cassie frowned, wondering if she had misplaced them, but a quick search turned up nothing. She knocked on Lila's door, intending to ask if she'd seen them, but there was no response. The door, as always, was locked. Cassie felt an uneasy knot form in her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next few days, things escalated. One night, while Cassie was getting ready for bed, she heard it again. That whispering. But this time, it was louder, more intense. She couldn't make out the words, but the rhythm of Lila's voice seemed frantic, like she was chanting or reciting something. Cassie pressed her ear to the wall, listening closely. But the moment she did, the whispering stopped. Her heart raced in the silence that followed. Something was very wrong. Cassie's mind raced with possibilities. What was Lila doing in there? And why did she lock the door every night? What was that smell? And where had the knives gone? Determined to find out, Cassie waited until the next day when Lila left for work. As soon as she heard the front door click shut, Cassie hurried to Lila's room. Her hand trembled as she tried the doorknob, still locked. But she had anticipated that. She had swiped a small screwdriver from the junk drawer earlier, figuring it might help her pop the lock. Her heart pounded as she slid the tool into the lock, fumbling nervously. After a few tense moments, she heard a click. The door creaked open. Cassie stepped into Lila's room, her breath catching in her throat. The room was cold, unnaturally so. The blinds were drawn tightly shut, blocking out all light. But that wasn't what made Cassie's blood run cold. The walls were covered in strange symbols. Dark, jagged markings scrawled across the walls in what looked like charcoal, or worse, blood. There were candles, burned down to nubs, scattered on the floor. And in the corner, a small, filthy mattress was pushed against the wall, surrounded by more symbols. But that wasn't all. On a small table near the bed, there were jars, several of them, filled with dark liquid. Cassie's stomach turned as she realized they were filled with blood. Beside the jars were the missing knives, stained and rusted, as if they had been used for something terrible. A wave of nausea hit her, but she couldn't look away. In the center of the room, on the floor, was a large, grotesque figure drawn in some sort of black substance. It was a circle with intricate, almost alien designs spiraling out from the middle. And in the center, there was something else, something moving. Cassie blinked, her heart pounding in her ears. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no, it was moving. A small, pale creature, writhing in the center of the circle. Its body was twisted and contorted, its limbs too long and spindly, its skin slick and translucent. It had no eyes, just a gaping, toothless mouth that seemed to be gasping for air. She stumbled backward, her mind screaming in terror. What the hell had Lila been doing in here? Cassie fled the room, slamming the door behind her. She locked herself in her own room, shaking uncontrollably as she tried to process what she had just seen. Her mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that apartment any longer. She had to leave. Cassie didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake, huddled in her bed, listening to every creak and groan of the apartment. At one point, she heard Lila come home, her footsteps heavy as she walked to her room. The door clicked shut, locked again. But there was no whispering that night. No strange noises, just an unbearable, suffocating silence. The next morning, Cassie packed her bags. She didn't care about the deposit or finding a new place. She just needed to get out. She avoided Lila, barely glancing in her direction when she left her room. Lila was in the kitchen, humming quietly to herself, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the air. "Leaving already?" Lila asked, her voice casual. Cassie froze, her hand on the doorknob. "Yeah," she muttered. Something came up. Lila smiled, a slow, unsettling smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good luck," she said softly. Cassie didn't reply. She just left. That night, Cassie stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. Her nerves still raw from the horrors she had seen. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the creature writhing in the circle, its mouth opening and closing in silent agony. She woke up in a cold sweat. her heart racing. But it wasn't a nightmare that had woken her. It was the sound of whispering, coming from the closet. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the closet door, which was slightly ajar. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, the same frantic, eerie cadence she had heard in Lila's room. With trembling hands, she reached for the lamp and flicked it on. There, standing in the doorway of the closet, was Lila. Her face pale, her eyes empty and black, a twisted smile on her lips. "Did you really think you could leave?" Lila whispered, her voice a low hiss. Before Cassie could scream, the lights flickered out, and the room plunged into darkness.